Due to some technical difficulties, someone's audio was not recorded. This guy, and there are a lot of chunks that went missing because of that. But in this video we have Gurkan who is introducing himself, and there is a nice conversation with Mohammed and friends. So enjoy, and there will be an extra video coming with some explanation and a demo.
I think people don't know me, right? Yeah, I think people don't know me. Shall I introduce myself a little bit? Hey guys, so my name is Gurkan. I'm an old colleague of Sipka from RTL, friend of his, and I recently stopped working for RTL and I decided to join fully Elsa team to make Elsa part of my life from now. And my expertise area is mostly microservice architecture on .NET environment. I have also a bit of front-end and mobile application skills, but mainly backend. And I'm a geek nerd a little bit. I have a bird, I play tennis, and I want to learn to play violin. I think that summarizes it.
Yeah, hi Gurkan. Nice to meet you and get well soon.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, I added some comments about that. Yeah, on the 27, it's a bit down there, 2872. I saw you posted some comments about that, Mohammed.
Yeah,
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, I think I had the same questions regarding that when we have multiple loops. But then I also encountered the situation that we discussed previously when you have a loop and fork that comes from another loop, and resetting that would be quite tricky. But let's first go over the proposal that we are on the same page. So let me get it here. Okay. So the idea was to have a differentiation between the normal join without an explicit join activity in the workflow. Basically, what I propose is then just to select one of the options, which is wait for continue always, which whenever something gets activated, it just continues. It makes sense from the perspective of the user. It just says, well, whenever you come here, we'll continue. And we discussed this as well with the for. Well, the for was basically executed within the activity, so it didn't activate it twice for the join. And then to make it explicit, and I looked into the BPMN notations and the best practices in that, is to have an explicit fork and join to also give more details about what the intent is of the workflow. Having just a merge on an activity doesn't really show you what the intent is, and especially when we would have had properties to manipulate the behavior of the merging on the activity itself, it's not visual in the process itself. And I think that is one of the most important things that we can benefit from if we use flowcharts, that we can use the flowcharts as a description of what is really intended from the process itself and explain it, for instance, to the business, what's going on and why and when we make decisions. So having an explicit join will mitigate that problem and describe explicitly what the behavior is going to be like. And I came up with then 4 different joined cases where you join multiple executions into a continuous one flow, and that is continue always, which is basically the same as combining it on the activity. Whenever one of the branches has an activity that is activating an activity that has a join, just continue from there and schedule the next activity. This means that we should abandon the current implementation where we do branch by branch execution, because then it wouldn't make sense to do so, because one branch will have priority over the others, and only when it's completely finished or comes to a blocking activity, then the others get a chance to execute. So I think we need to step away from that and go to an activity execution where all activities that are required to execute are put in a list and executed by one. We have a wait for any once, which means that when you have a merge, whenever one of the branches is going to activate the join, it will continue, and when the other branch is activated, then it will not continue unless the number of executions is higher. So the first one will execute. If the second branch and that is merged is going to be executed as well, it says, well, I already have that threshold of 1. I'm not going to do that. The wait for all is basically the other way around, where you say at least every branch should have executed at least the same amount of times to be able to continue. And the last is the complex, where you can have a different implementation, where you can say, okay, based on this given context with that key, it is allowed to continue. This is something that I was thinking about, and also in the second thing that I added, because in the first one I approached it as a bit the same way as you described it a moment, with a token or an indication in which context it is going to execute. But I thought that it's really tricky to do that. There are so many different paths that you can take, and we looked at that example the last time, where you have a for that is merged with a separate branch that isn't coming from a for loop or a loop that can continue multiple times, and how you could distinguish then which branch to reset and which branch not to reset. And if you think of that also from the perspective of that the process needs to be clear in the intent how it executes, then it should be more visual when something continues or not. And having then an explicit if statement, if this is in the same context, then continue, will make the process way clearer than this hidden logic of the tokens. But I'm not quite sure about that. And what I found is that when I tried to do some real life examples, I ran in so much trouble with the algorithm to think when should it execute and when not, that I abandoned that idea and thought, let it be at the designer of the process to decide when and how it should be continuing. But maybe you can explain little bit more about the concerns that you might have, Mohammed, regarding the counter, so I can see whether or not we can mitigate that in an other solution.
Yeah, thank you, Franz. So I think if we implement some counter, I'm just concerned that because we maybe don't know how many times the activity is going to be executed, so we might end up missing like off by one error, So if the counter keeps increasing, or we need to decrease the counter every time we are executing, it might not match at the end. So we will end up with an endless loop. So I think keeping a counter and then keeping track how it increments or decrements could end up in a situation where it doesn't add up. So I thought maybe a flag will be a simpler implementation, but as you said, a flag, then how to reset the flag once we enter the loop again. We might end up also with the same problem. So yeah, I think explicit join could really solve these issues, because it makes the intent clear to have an explicit join and define exactly how I want to execute. And other thing is maybe we need to have some kind of loop detection, and maybe we should disable some of the scenarios that will become problematic. Because if we leave it freely unless we have a way to prevent the workflow from running hot or causing any memory leaks, we might have to put some restrictions anyway.
Do you think that the chance of running hot or an infinite loop is something that should be solved by the join activity, or is this something that is implicit in the workflow execution anyways, regardless of we use joins or not?
Yeah, it should be, I think, in the workflow execution, because that is a safeguard that must be there. And I think we discussed this one a few weeks back, that there is already a mechanism to do that. But I think it has to be by default there. Otherwise, because if you are in a production environment and the user makes a mistake and you are running hot, and there is no other way other than to stop everything and kill the instance. So probably some safeguards should be there. So some safeguards in the workflow execution itself. And if we can also give some visual indication to the user that this kind of scenario might cause trouble, or this kind of scenario is not recommended. Visual feedback is very important. So explicit join is definitely a very good visual feedback, but also if we can give some indication that this workflow maybe is not going to work the way we are intending.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's also really important to have that. It can go hand in hand.